Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We're going to wait a couple of seconds for the room to populate as people are coming in. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today, we're here for the Public Religions and Global Solidarity, a conversation between Jose Casanova and Father Patrick Gilger. Professor Jeffrey Goldfarb will introduce the speakers in the panel discussion, but I will start with a few house rules just so everybody knows as you come in. We are recording this webinar, so if you're asking any questions, your name and your questions might be on the recording, so you're aware. Also, keep an eye on the chat. I will be sharing some information about the Democracy Seminar, who is sponsoring this event, our social media information, our website, and some other interesting upcoming events. So please keep an eye on the chat. I will leave it now to Professor Jeff Goldfarb, who's a Professor Emeritus at the New School for Social Research and also the editor of Democracy Seminar. Jeff, thank you.
Thank you, Lala. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you all. It's my great pleasure to be moderating today's special session of the Democracy Seminar entitled Public Religion and Global Solidarity. I note as we're doing this that the Democracy Seminar has a long history. It started in the 1980s, dealing with the struggle for democracy in East Central Europe and comparing it to Western experience back then. And we've revived it as the challenges to liberal democracy and democratic ideals have been escalating around the world these days. So there's a Democracy Seminar then and now. I'm especially happy to note that Jose Casanova was an active member of the Democracy Seminar right now, and that his work, as it was the case back then, is very important for understanding and considering the political and intellectual project of our seminar. Today's conversation will be between two scholars and public intellectuals who combine deep learning and experience on the topic of public religion and global solidarity, on the relationship between democracy and religion, who combine deep learning on this topic and experience as well from different perspectives and positions, with a shared commitment to engage the informed and general public on this topic. Jose is my longtime friend and colleague since my earliest days at the New School, and Patrick is my most recent former student, who both of them have provided me with important understandings of what public religion is and what it can be, and of course, they've provided this not only for me. Jose is a leading sociologist on the topic, the author of the classic Public Religions in the Modern World, who since his publication has gone on to further explore the limits of secularization and analyze global religious and secular social dynamics in his numerous series of lectures, essays, public papers, books, and edited volumes. And Patrick also is exploring these similar themes focused upon embodied public and private practices in his already impressive body of works, crystallized in his brilliant dissertation that he recently defended, Fashioning Religious Selves in a Secular Age. I had the great honor of serving as the chair of this committee, and I'm quite confident it will soon be available as an indispensable book in our local neighborhood bookstores. The topic of the dialogue today draws upon a recent paper Jose has prepared for the plenary assembly of the Pontifical Council of Culture, entitled A Necessary Humanism for Our Global Age, and the role of religions in fostering the globalization of fraternity. I find his argument cogent and illuminating, but I also wonder about what might be considered the other side of the coin, the seamy side religion has played played worldwide in fostering autocracies? Is it globalization of solidarity, or is it religiously sanctioned anti-humanism, or at least anti-liberal democracy? And if it is the case, as I think it is, that religion plays both this positive and negative role in our political culture, I wonder how they relate. And I wonder particularly, and I turn first to Jose to offer his comments, analyses, judgments on this question. We will then proceed. Jose and Patrick will discuss the issue. And as we proceed, I invite you to ask questions. Lala, is it in the chat room or is it in the question and answer?
It's in the question and answer, the bottom right of your screen. And
Right,
I will post in the chat information too.
Okay, so use the question and answer as questions, comments come to mind. Lala and I will be monitoring them, and at some point we'll bring your questions and comments in to the discussion. So please, Jose, I look very much forward to your commentary.
Thank you, Jeff. And it's a great pleasure to be back at the new school, my alma mater, and the institution where I also spent 20 years as a professor. So altogether, basically 30 years of my life were associated with the new school. So it's a great pleasure to be back. Jeff came as a very young professor when I was ready to write my dissertation. And actually he sat on my dissertation committee, one of the 3 members of the committee. And I recently sat on Patrick's dissertation. So it's a great pleasure to be here and to have this conversation with good friends. Yes, the let's say question you raise, be careful with religion. Religion is very dangerous. Indeed, religion can be very dangerous. The sacred is precisely what sacralizes violence. But when there is violence, it is another higher sacred that can precisely establish violence and bring peace. So this is a constant of history. The second constant of history is religions have always served the role of legitimating established systems. So social integration in Durkheim's sense. But in terms of crisis, in times of transition, religions have played the charismatic, prophetic role of expanding fraternity beyond the tribe, beyond the kinship, beyond the city, beyond the kingdom, even beyond the empire. It is precisely because we are now in a time of crisis. The attempts we have basically made to expand the system we had under Western hegemony throughout the 20th century to our global system, a form of global governance for all, is not functioning. We see that there are fundamental global challenges. Let's name the 4 most important. Right now, Glasgow is taking place. So the environmental crisis. Second, we are in the midst, slowly coming out of the global health crisis. We've been in the last 20 years throughout the world, or our democratic policies have been shaken by the immigration and refugee crisis. And then very clearly what our global capitalist system is doing is create a lot of inequality. Not anymore only in the peripheries of the South, but at home. The fundamental question is that the 2 global systems we have of global governance, the Westphalian system of nation states in the United Nations, and if you wish, Davos, a forum that claims we are going to order the globe in a just and fair way. They're not functioning. They cannot address. It's not that they don't want to. They are, if you use, structurally unable to address the issue of inequality. Capitalism is, because the old capitalism, the Marxist analysis argued capitalism needs to exploit everybody. And once everybody is exploited, then everybody will get rid of the system and take over capital. The problem with capitalism today is that capitalism doesn't need to basically exploit everybody, only half of the population. The other half are discarded. The problem with capitalism today is not exploitation, but simply ignorance or discarding the people. The people that feel that their dignity precisely is not represented by the system today. And we see this happening within the very core of the capitalist system, people which are left out by the system. And the same goes with the democracy is of course what we want to maintain, but democracy to survive has to somehow become embedded in new transnational structures that help this democracy to go beyond borders and create precisely the kind of transnational global civil society that will help global governance. Now, it is because this is my reading of a contemporary moment. It's not that I want to privilege religion. I don't privilege religion. I want to have any force, any social force, any resource that goes beyond borders, that build bridges, and therefore that can address the global challenges affecting global humanity. There are many secular institutions there. There are secular movements. Let's say Doctors Without Borders is the best example. But as a matter of fact, in the last 3 years, it's very clear that the time when all the system has come back to its own near reflex of the national borders, and which we saw it in the COVID crisis. We saw how the Pope has spent, the leader of the largest, if you wish, religion in the world, has spent the last 2-3 years having conversations, dialogue, and signing joint documents with the head of Al-Azhar, the highest figure within Sunni Islam, with Al-Sistani, the great Ayatollah leader of Shiites, recently, and both of them on issues precisely of global fraternization, how to overcome the crisis we have. And recently, the letter he signed together with the patriarch in Constantinople, ecumenical patriarch of the Orthodox, and with the Archbishop of Canterbury. Now, those are only text. And of course, what do they mean? Well, they only mean that they may be able to move some people. We know, let's talk about the environment. We know science. Science lets you know things, but science never moves you to action. To translate cognitive knowledge into commitment, you need something else. And I don't care where it comes from, a commitment to some secular value, humanism, or transnational working class solidarity, or transnational feminism, transnational pacifism, but you have to belong to some kind of social movements where you are engaged personally, and that gives you the commitment, and if you wish, the courage to go beyond your own interests, personal, and the interests of your own group, and the interests of your own country to transcend these limitations. And I think here is where, at the personal level, I think Patrick has much more to say than I, how those things, how does this motivation, how does this, if you wish, impulse to commit one's ethical, basically, values to some kind of goal.
Jose, it's such a pleasure to listen to you speak again and to hear the passion and fervor with which you're able to describe some of the challenges that we face today as global citizens, but also as local citizens. Jeff, it's a great honor to be here with you too, and to be back at the New School, as Jose said. I have not spent 30 years of my life at the New School, but at least, 6 is not so bad. And I have just left there and moved to Loyola University, Chicago. Picking up on Jose's point, yes, this is exactly what I want to drive home. And my own work is, in some ways, without being overly grandiose, I hope, almost like a micro-sociological, a practice sociological appropriation of Jose's, macro scale work on public religion. So it's a question of how we actually are able to look at local religious groups. Now, again, I agree with Jose, it does not have to be particularly religious groups, but we are looking for a particular kind of group that can construct a person, a mode of subjectivity, a form of the self, however we want to describe this, that is able to live within these incredibly difficult tensions that we find ourselves inhabiting these days. So that's the kind of question, like, where can we find these kinds of people who are able to be Democrats, to be citizens of a democracy amidst the tensions that we face today? Maybe two things about that might be helpful here. The first is, Jeff, to your second question about the dangers of religion. Like Jose, I have no interest in pretending this is not the case. Of course, this is the case, right? But I want to make one point from this micro level, from this focus on individual persons. The recent Pew study, the 2021 Pew study of religion in the United States now, this is not just a global case, but the case of the United States, gives us a really interesting example, because, you know, many people listening or people maybe watching this would, I think, very rationally have a question about, well, what does this rise of what is being called within the sociology of religion now, Christian nationalism, often white Christian nationalism, have to do with this kind of global religion and movement towards solidarity and fraternity that Jose and I both want to describe in different ways? It's an excellent question and a really important one. Interestingly, this Pew data has one very important piece of information that I think can help us get a grip on why this kind of attention to the fine-grained analysis, the kind of person who can be a Democrat, is so important. Here's the piece of information. In the United States, secularization in terms of participation in religious institutions, just in that way of understanding secularization, seems to be continuing, you know, within the United States. There's a drop-off in participation in most places, but not in all. There is one particularly notable exception, in fact. Between the years of Donald Trump's presidency, 2016 to 2020, there was an increase in the number of evangelicals in the United States from 25% to 29%. Now, at that exact same moment, there was a sharp decline in the amount of attendance at religious participation amongst evangelicals. So what we see is an increase in the number of people who are calling themselves religious, calling themselves evangelical, and a decline amongst that same group in religious participation. So recent scholars have been doing some work, especially Ryan Burge at Eastern Illinois, but also David French, you know, who is an interesting person himself, a public intellectual, have been noticing that what we're seeing is this gap between people who are claiming the label of evangelical, but not participating in any particular religious institution or practice. And this can show us in some ways the need to pay attention to which practices it is that are really forming this identity, the sense of self that we have. And that's the kind of work that I think it really has to be done. The other example, this is the second point, is that some recent work has been done these days with some of the groups that I focused my own attention on. Particularly, we can maybe pay attention to an Italian Catholic group called the Community of Sant'Egidio. It just means the community of St. Giles in Italian. They're a Roman group and founded in 1968 by Andrea Riccardi, a history professor in Rome. He's still alive. And there's been a recent study by Jose, I believe your colleague at Paul Elie. He did the Berkeley Center at Georgetown. He wrote a really lovely piece, an interview with the two leaders of the Sant'Egidio community here in the United States of America. And so what we are seeing there is that this community of people, through their particular religious practices of prayer, companionship with the poor, especially with the homeless or with the elderly, produces in them a particular capacity to stay within relationships of tension, within moments of when most of us, you know, are not willing to go. And this capacity to engage and to remain in a practice of friendship, they call it, this religious practice of friendship, is not just a local micro capacity. It gives birth to these global capacities. In fact, as Jose well knows, Sant'Egidio was one of the communities that was helpful in ending the civil war in Mozambique and being involved in trying to bring peace to the Balkans. They were, you know, not able to succeed fully there and are currently doing the same work right now in the South Sudan. So if we talk about particular versions of religion, without trying to make an argument that this is the only thing happening, I think we have to look for how these kinds of persons are being created on the ground level so that this kind of global solidarity can be birthed.
I think that our moderator has disappeared, so let's moderate ourselves, Patrick.
Sounds
yes,
good.
I mean, Jeff also raised the issue, general issue about the dangers of religion. And of course, the question is, but we don't turn it around. When there is a secular movement that is violent, we don't say because a secular movement is violent, we get rid of secularity. No secular movement should apply. Namely, you cannot use this type of category, religion is a broad category other than the secular, and thinking that only the secular movements are good and the religious are bad. No, there are secular movements which are good, there are ones which are very, very bad, and the same thing happens with religion. Now, what I want to point out precisely is, talking of immigration, for instance, again, the same data or the same information that Patrick has mentioned concerning the US, we know that European Christian nationalism is precisely carried by post-Catholics and post-Protestants, not religious people, the churches, the leadership, the engaged nuns and brothers and sisters, and the most committed, let's say, Catholics, have been the ones pro-immigration, pro-refugees, while you have, of course, a proclamation of European Catholic nationalism or Christian nationalism in Europe also, which is racist and xenophobic and anti-immigrant. But those are not necessarily the religious people. They are people that have the identity that Europe was Catholic once and should remain Catholic ever, although I myself I'm not a practicing Catholic, but I know that Catholicism is what Europe should have. The point is that, again, we cannot talk of religion in the abstract. In general, we have to talk of specific groups. Now, I'm using religion here because de facto, religions, these world religions have become truly transnational, transcontinental organizations, institutions, movements. So the base for bridging the other, for building bridges, for crossing borders is there. The question is whether those resources are going to be used. And I'm not that helpful because precisely many of the people on the ground may be the ones that oppose Pope Francis. It's enough that Pope Francis says something for very conservative Catholics to immediately oppose and say that capitalism is very good, that he's an anti-capitalist, therefore a socialist, a Peronist, or much else. And of course, I don't want to minimize at all the dysfunctional nature of the so-called religious institutions. I mean, the Catholic Church has a sexual abuse scandal that cannot let it go, right? They cannot get their act together. And of course, the clericalism, the patriarchy within the church, those are fundamental problems that will need to be addressed. My only question is, despite of all of that, there are possibilities for transnational Catholic networks to be used precisely to develop structures of governance, not to substitute capitalism. Nobody has an alternative to capitalism, and nobody has an alternative to the democratic nation state. But how to expand these structures so that these bridges that address global challenges are being constructed.
So I have to apologize. I'm not only having internet problems, but my computer just crashed. So I haven't heard the last 4 minutes or so. Patrick, perhaps you want to respond to that, and then I'll jump in, or I can jump in right now.
Yeah, just two quick things there in response to what Jose is saying. Obviously, judging by the clothing that I'm wearing, I have a slightly different participatory relationship with Catholicism and with religion in the modern age. But what I do want to say is that without any presumption that religion itself, I agree, of course, is not a monolithic category, and there's no reason to pretend that it is. And there's no reason to even to pretend that particular religions are unique or perfect solutions to all of this. Instead, what I think is happening on the ground level is that right now, say we take the Catholic Church as an example, there is an incredible tension that is happening, a huge controversy over the nature of the Catholic tradition. That argument is happening within the tradition at the moment. And so that argument is going to have real ramifications for whether or not the global systems that Jose is looking for are going to be able to function, right? So we just take a very small example like this, the Society of Jesus, of which I'm a part, the Jesuits. We have a massive network of universities and educational systems across the globe. Now, there's huge opportunities for alliances, like global alliances within our university systems in many ways. And this remains true, like these things, and we have incredible lay people and Jesuits, students and staff members who are very interested in collaborating on this kind of large-scale process of global democracy, global fraternity. At the same time, it is absolutely not the case that everyone who participates in these institutions is a practicing Catholic or believes in this religious basis for global solidarity. And this asks a really interesting question. Is it the case that these religious institutions are going to be able to sustain a sense of mission across global boundaries while people within them are only marginally participative? So we have to ask these questions, I think, at the micro level as well as at the macro level. And that, again, gets me back to the point about religious, like church attendance for evangelicals there. The same thing kind of could be said for Catholics, that we'd have to look very closely at what kind of practices what kind of groups are participating in, so that we can evaluate what kind of capacities to engage with the public are produced by those particular practices. And those are not all the same. A Eucharist that takes one particular shape that will not produce the same kind of capacities to engage in public life as a Roman Catholic Eucharist that looks differently. We have to look at those things on the ground. What kind of capacities within the subject are being produced by what particular religious practices? Those differentiations that my research is focused on are only within the Catholic Church, much less within global Christianity, much less within the potential alliance between like versions of Judaism and versions of Christianity, to take one pick. But those kinds of things I think are absolutely essential that we have to take deeply into account. Another final point here before I'd love to hear more from you, Jeff, and push us further on these questions, is that I think, Mark Chavez's old point about secularization, meaning a decline of religious authority, is incredibly relevant right here. That what capacities do religious institutions have for cultivating these kinds of persons that are going to be able to engage in the way that Jose is imagining? I mean, in my experience, the capacities are not very significant. It takes enormous effort to be able to cultivate a thick practice that is strong enough to resist the way capitalism gets inside of us and manipulates our own desires, to pick just one, of the many other systems that we have to deal with.
So I wonder, first of all, Patrick, do you see any, in your microanalysis, do you see articulations of this solidaristic imagination that Jose notes at the leadership level? So the Catholic Church itself creates some solidarities, established parts of the Catholic Church, such as the Jesuits, have it built in. But there is the question of whether in the practices of ordinary folks, and not just religious leaders who are informed, more informed about theology and more informed about, one hopes, about the environmental crisis, the crisis of capitalism, and so forth. But do you see this? I mean, it seems that Jose's hope ultimately is predicated on evidence that you might find in everyday practices.
I think there's good news here to communicate, Jeff, that there is real hope on the ground level there. Now, as I've said, it's not universal. Look, I mean, speaking as a Catholic and speaking as a priest just for a moment, like it is not, I find less of that than I wish. At the same time, it's there. It's real. It's real within these communities, which, to be honest, even as a Catholic, I knew almost nothing about any of these three communities that I studied. The Focolare were one, the Communion and Liberation another, and Sant'Egidio the third. Each of these communities that I spent an inordinate amount of time with, getting to know and getting to love, they are very different versions of Catholicism, but each of them none in perfection, without pretending, but each of them have this vision. They have a capacity to sustain a vision of global solidarity. Now, one of the things that I found in my own research is that part of the reason they have the capacity to sustain that within individual persons is that, one of the things that happens in modernity, as you both know very well, people listening will know very well, is that differentiation, as Jose showed, and this is public religions, that differentiation is the key to the secularization thesis. This is what happens there. Now, one of the things that I'm trying to argue is that differentiation should be taken in two different categories. It should be taken as a public, political phenomenon, whether or not we are trying to reintegrate church and state, Christian nationalism. Now, we do not, the Roman Catholic Church has come down very clearly. We do not want to do that. So these groups obey that. The public differentiation, they're in support of, but they want to have some kind of personal integration. But this personal integration does not look like political integralism all the time. Sometimes it looks like generosity with regard to global solidarity. And you can see this on the ground level with the community of Sant'Egidio, for example, every single Tuesday serving the homeless in these atrium and the Grand Central Station, and using the same kind of self that they learn in these relationships that they sustain with the homeless over many years in these situations of war and conflict to help bring peace and global and produce global solidarity. They are not different selves that are deployed in different places. It is the same integrated self. And we could give different examples from the Focolare and from communion and liberation, but that is happening. There is hope on the ground level there.
If I may add from this transnational perspective, what is amazing about these movements that Patrick is studying, all three were born in the last 30, 40 years in Italy, but immediately they transcended the Italian borders and became embedded practically in every Catholic country in the world. Now, here you have, let's say, Sant'Egidio is a global movement of Catholics engaged in peacemaking and in basically helping the poor at the peripheries. So this ability for any movement to immediately radiate into every country in the world is one of the ways in which this thing happens. Before it was through, the Catholic Church always did it through religious orders. Religious orders were transnational, and they basically had a transnational organization. But of course, it was very different. What you have now is lay Catholic movements. Those are lay Catholics. Some of them run completely by lay people and basically doing it on their own. And again, I would argue that the fact that they are so different is good. We don't want to have one single Catholic model how to do things. The more variation there is, the more pluralism within the Catholic Church, the better. Okay, I'm going to raise just one more issue, because I think is the crucial one. We always thought that the religions cannot live together. The problem of we're suspicious, they don't recognize each other. Well, actually, in the last 50 years, the overwhelming evidence is that with some very important still, if you wish, late come or people that are not there yet, especially Muslim groups, the rest accept a model of religious pluralism. Nobody questions practically, I would say, religious pluralism around the world today. Religious pluralism is no longer the question, the cause for violence. The real question for polarization today is moral pluralism. For us as sociologists, the real question is, was Durkheim right? That you can only have one public morality in a society, or can you have different moralities recognizing each other and living together? And this is the real test today, not religion. When we see religion, is religion defending one particular form of morality? The real source of conflict today is gender issues. This is the real conflict. It is around gender issues that the whole polarization, you could say, race, there where the racial factor is also as important as in the United States. But I think that this is where the problem is. We have to differentiate, or we have to get at the bottom of the difficulty of establishing functioning moral pluralism where people recognize each other despite basically defending or embedding different moralities.
Yeah, so then I'm curious about, Patrick examined three heartening developments among Catholics in America. And I think it is crucial, as Jose just pointed out, that it's actually applying developments that originated in Italy. So that's an instantiation of on the ground of Jose's hopes. But you told the good news, Patrick, and so does Jose. I'm wondering about the bad news, because there also seems to be some international, I don't know if it's solidarity, but solidarity. It's weird to use the term solidarity in this regard, but kind of maybe conspiracy of xenophobes, sexists, racists, and so forth. And often religion plays a role in that. Now, I don't particularly, I think I agree with you that I think you're both saying that religion is not particularly good or particularly bad when it comes to this issue. But it seems that the bad aspects of this have been with us with great drama and negative effect in the last 20 years. So I'm wondering if you, at the same time that you see this on the ground, positive developments, do you see the negative developments as well, Patrick? And at the same time, yeah, maybe that for now.
Sure. Yeah, I think that without question, I know there are no question that there are difficult developments on the ground as well. Now, one of the things that we talked earlier, about the lack of capacity, even within a genuinely, but also supposedly hierarchical institution like the Catholic Church, the incapacity to control or dictate the ideologies of its membership. Like, this is, despite what people think, this is not the case, to be able to dictate these things from the top level down, which can be difficult and a problem, but can also be a potential source of solution, because new things can bubble up from the ground level. Now, look, one of the things that Jose is mentioning is this difficulty and the need for mutual recognition in conversation in the public sphere of global civil society or of national civil societies. Now, the great hope, right? The great hope of Habermas and others had been that with secularization would produce this space for rational conversation among people from different life world backgrounds. Now what we're seeing is that secularization itself is not necessarily able to guarantee that kind of person is able to enter the public sphere. Neither is religion. There's no need to say that religion is there too. But there are particular cases where that is the case. So, for example, there have been a whole series of difficult conversations about what the supposedly power-inflected secular shape of the public sphere is in global civil society. We understand these things. Talal Assad and many others are offering these kinds of criticisms there. Who can actually enter the public sphere? Who can be heard there? Can you even make your voice heard there? This is an incredibly important question. I just want to offer one counterexample from within these groups that I've studied. This group, the Focolare, founded in Trent and during World War II in the 1940s, they have a practice that they call Jesus Forsaken. Without analyzing the practice over deeply, one of the things that it produces within them, this way of life that they live on a regular basis, it produces within them a capacity to remain within tension and to listen to those with whom they disagree. So Assad and many others' argument is that what's needed is that we have to reform the shape of the public sphere so that particular religious actors can be heard in the public sphere. Now, okay, sure, that's a very important thing. But in fact, what we are seeing in this example is these religious actors who were not advocating being seen and heard themselves in the public sphere, but are instead making it possible for the public sphere to be a place of listening by being listeners themselves. They have become this kind of person that is able to listen. to people who are very different with them. So if we talk about mutual recognition across differences, even differences of gender or of race or et cetera, right? And differences of ideological opinion about these things. If we cannot listen to one another across those things, there is no such thing as a public sphere. It's all gone. And what we see is, ironically, it's these religious actors who are able to have the kind of selves that are able to remain within the tension of ideological difference and listen to those with whom they disagree and engage with them in a pursuit of unity. Again, not to pretend that this is universal, it's also real. We have to ask ourselves, what other kinds of communities are able to produce this kind of self? This is in some ways a very simple Tocquevillian argument. It's just, when we go around and we look at the practices, what kind of practices are producing people who are able to remain in the conflict rather than withdrawing into our lifestyle enclaves that we all enjoy so we don't have to deal with each other? This is one. We have to look here to be able to see sources of hope.
Yeah,
if I can answer your question at the macro level, give you the bad news.
Please.
Yes, there is a lot of transnational religious movements which are very bad. And basically it's the coalition of American evangelicals and the Russian Orthodox Church. This is the real issue. They've tried to bring the Catholic Church on board. Steve Bannon tried to do it, creating right-wing Catholic parties in France, in Spain, in Italy. Unfortunately, in Italy failed, although the Italian politicians were ready to cooperate, but ultimately it failed because the Vatican obviously didn't have any support. They've been having world congresses of families to defend the family and defend traditional values now for about 20 years, all over the world. But basically, it's a coalition of American evangelicals and the Russian Orthodox Church, which now the Putin regime presents itself as the defender of traditional Christian values against the European Union, which means liberalism, secularism, feminism, and basically LGBT rights, right? So the degenerate Europe, now Russia is supposed to represent the authentic Christian traditional Europe. And of course, you have a lot of traditional Catholics that rather follow Putin and the American evangelicals than the Pope. This is a fact. This is a fact. But so again, if you have transnational movements, you are going to have good and bad. We know from social movements theory that every social movement basically somehow induces to have a counter movement. And there are a lot of links between right-wing, this is the paradox, right? We have right-wing populist parties everywhere, which are nationalists, but now you have an international of populist nationalisms. So it is this, and of course, this is the way in which our global age functions. But the only defense against this, look what happened now in Hungary. The only person who can go against Urban is this very traditional Catholic who was elected mayor in this city in Hungary, and maybe the kind of force that can unseat Urban. So the point is, the question is, how do you address the question of having coalitions of right-wing parties, which are basically anti-democratic, anti-liberal, anti-immigration, and anti-feminism? And these are basically the kind of coalition you find. In Spain, you have actually a new party, Vox. Vox is the party that came out of Stephen Bannon attempts and has been partly succeeded in basically bringing a lot of chaos into the Spanish party system. And fortunately, not sufficiently to unseat the governing coalition in Spain right now, the socialist coalition. But anyhow, the point is that the only way of defending against this kind of traditional, if you wish, claims to a region, to a country, to Europe, Catholic Europe or Christian Europe, is precisely if Christians stand up. Against white Christian nationalism, the solution is to develop basically a Christians, coalition of Christians with other races, feminists, etc. This is the only way in which you can defeat those movements.
Yeah, I feel like I have an obligation to kind of question you
Sure.
more radically. I mean, I find the two of you, I should say, just about all I know about the relationship between religion and politics comes from the two of you, and then variations on the theme.
Well, Poland taught you a lot.
Poland taught me a lot. Yes,
Good and bad, good and bad.
Yeah, and actually, of course, when you said there's no Christian nationalism, I'm thinking, whoa, wait a second. Didn't you say there's no Catholic nationalism or something to that? No, I misunderstood.
Said that the attempts. No, I said that the attempts to create a Catholic right-wing alliance of Catholics together with the Orthodox and the evangelicals has failed. They're still there and they're still trying to bring it, but it cannot create the kind of transnational alliance because they have not been able to use the institution of the Catholic Church for it.
Okay. So at least for now, given the present Pope, I wonder if there were a different Pope, whether there would be more possibilities for that, because it seems to me that there is such a danger. So there's an opportunity right now with the Catholic Church. So I was going to say that when I think about these things, I think about what I learned with my colleague Jose Casanova for 20 years, constantly always talking about this. And you've persuaded me, and you haven't only persuaded me in your argument in the classic book, but as you've kind of rethought your position and as you've been in dialogue with Tal al-Assad, who I've also learned something from. And then Patrick really, I find his kind of micro-analysis, his close analysis of religious practices and subjectivities really, really important. And as I'm thinking about the problems of our times, this possibility of creating, using different cultural forms to create political subjectivities that are capable of addressing the problems of our day, I think is terribly important. I've learned a lot from you, but I feel an obligation as the moderator to speak for people who I imagine are in the audience, who kind of see the way you weigh this potential versus the threat. Either they maybe they just would reject your position, but I think more likely what people would think is that yes, what you're saying is cogent, but the threat of the right-wing version of this solidarity seems to be more pressing, especially when we go beyond the Catholic world. So in the United States with Christian nationalism, in the Muslim world, many different varieties of religious political religions that not only are dangers to the secular and to liberals, but very, very dangerous to each other, as is becoming evident day by day in Afghanistan with ISIS and the Taliban apparently the beginning is of a civil war there. So that stuff seems really, really powerful to many of us, and maybe more powerful than this ray of hope that the two of you are highlighting. So I guess having said that and inviting people to join in the questions to raise such issues as it applies to the experiences of different countries, I want to go more. I want you to follow through on your analysis. That Jose points to this. That is to consider. There's the possibilities of these solidarities, but I'd like you to consider, well, what are the obstacles? What are the obstacles at the macro level that one can observe, and what are the obstacles as you? That question is for Jose, and what are the obstacles at the micro level? So that there is this motivation, there are these activities, but these activities aren't fully successful, or they lead to surprising outcomes where a commitment to liberation and openness ends up being a commitment to liberation and openness for us, but not for them.
Let me quote two different figures. Greta Thunberg, the 18-year-old hero, has said, our economies have failed us, our politicians have failed, our humanity has not failed yet. And Pope Francis, a year ago, in the midst of the pandemic, wrote, for all our hyperconnectivity, we witness a fragmentation that made it more difficult to resolve problems that affect us all. Anyone who thinks that the only lesson to be learned was the need to improve what we were already doing or to refine existing systems of regulations is denying reality. So what are the obstacles? The obstacles are us, our systems, nationalism, our national democracies are unable to go beyond. So democracy will only succeed if it succeeds in enclosing itself, then it will fail addressing the global challenges. So democracy can only ultimately succeed if it's able to transcend its national borders and collaborate with our democracies together to address the global challenges. None of these challenges, global health, global immigration, global inequality, global environment, can be solved by any country on their own. It has to be by all of them. And our international system, neither the capitalist nor the one on the Westphalian system, is not able to address those issues globally yet. So we just have to think outside the box. And I'm saying that this is one of the functions of religion in transitional prophetic times, to think outside the box.
Okay, so we agree that we should be thinking outside the box. I'll ask Patrick to consider the limitations of that thing, the possible limitations of that thinking as he explores people on the ground.
Yeah. You always ask me the most difficult questions, Jeff. So I really appreciate you.
And then you offer some intriguing answers.
Well,
So,
thank you very
please.
much. Thank you. Yeah, I have an idea in my head here, but let me try my best to unpack it the best we can. So let me pick up on what Jose mentioned there, that fragmentation is a huge part of the difficulty that we're dealing with these days. Now, just to put that as a context, right? Fragmentation that's happening in social movements and whatnot. So, okay, that's an idea. To recognize that this kind of personal integration that I'm describing in these groups is a danger is very much the case. Like, we have to recognize that any mode of integration can become dangerous. It really can be. But the response has generally been, the quote unquote secular response to these things has generally been to resolve these kinds of problems, has been to distance. Now, that can look like all kinds of different things. That personally, on the individual level, on the micro level, what it really looks like is what we learn in school. We take this problem and we take a distance from it. We separate ourselves. We disengage a little bit from this thing, and then we can analyze the problem from different perspectives and look for different solutions from it. Of course, this is an absolutely essential practice and tactic that we have to have. I just want to point out that if that is our only strategy, that is literally a move to fragmentation. It's a move out of the thing. And it produces a certain kind of person with a certain kind of strategy for solving problems. And that strategy for solving problems becomes take a distance from the thing and respond to the problem there. This is literally Tal al-Assad's, criticism of what secularism is, that it transforms religion into a belief and it wants to push us against these kinds of different practices. The problem is the Tocquevillian problem again, that this produces isolation in persons. And as we know very clearly, isolation can produce the conditions for authoritarianism to arise. So the question then becomes, how do we produce alliances on the ground level that are thicker than just the kind of what Robert Putnam calls the tertiary, or Bob Wuthnow calls the tertiary organizations, the tertiary associations, in which people participate, but they don't actually form their lives. And that's the point where I really want to come down to, that if we are serious about this, we have to take very seriously what kinds of practices are forming the characters of the persons who are participating in democracies. For secular persons, we may want to ask, like, is Twitter the main mode of interaction with democracy? And if so, that is purely a thin interaction. These are not like invested capacities, but nevertheless, they will form our characters. So we have to look for other places where these kinds of things are happening. I do think religion has a unique capacity to integrate thick practices. Now that unique capacity can be both dangerous and positive. Okay, sure, fine. But I want to look to these particular things without dramatizing or pretending that they are perfect or innocent in any way. There's no need, but we have to say that the mode of disengagement is a particular tactic for resolving problems, and it produces a certain kind of self. This is very necessary. It's not the only one.
So actually, you mentioned Twitter. That was the first, I think it was the first time media was invoked in the conversation today. It seems to me that one of the ways of linking the exploration, Jose's hopes with your observations has to have something to do with media. And I wonder if you see anything working in that way.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Jeff. And I think that it's very, in some ways, the answer is very simple. Like, we become the kinds of things that we do. So the more we engage in a particular kind of media exposure, the more we will become like what we are exposed to. So what we're looking for then are potential groups, like these are religious groups that I study, but what we're looking for are other associations that can provide rival sets of stories and practices than the kind that are being provided in various media spheres. So a quick story about that. One of the groups that I studied, Communion and Liberation, they're a little more of a traditionalist group, and they have embedded themselves in politics very significantly in the Italian context, not in the United States context. They've participated very differently. So we can talk about I just want to recognize that. We can talk about criticisms of these things. Okay, fair enough. But one of the things that has happened is during the run-up to the last election, a number of members of the movement with which I was associated or got to know, they were reading, a lot of these right-wing in the Catholic sphere. So this is places called LifeSite News and other things like that. People will know some of them or not know others. And they were told by the leaders of their, invited or seriously recommended, not under obedience, but seriously recommended, stop reading those things, begin reading the media of the movement. And out of obedience, out of recognition to what they had been asked to do, they did exactly this. And in my own research, they were very clear the consequence that produced on their own sense of self and their capacities to engage in the public. They talked explicitly with one another and with me about how this calmed anxieties, opened them up to new experiences, made them more able to listen to people with whom they didn't already agree. And I thought, well, we have to be able to recognize what certain forms of media are doing in the sensorium of human beings, how they rile us up and disturb us and make us anxious and nervous, and what other forms of media can do to mollify exactly that, to combat, to rival exactly that.
I mean, I have not followed really these debates as closely, but we know from Durkheim that it is collective rituals of some kind that actually create the bands of solidarity. So, and this happened precisely with socialist movement, working class movements, and nationalist movements, right? So you have collective rituals where your identity is then reinforced. Of course, they can be very dangerous. These movements, if they are exclusivist, they are very dangerous. What makes precisely religion today very less dangerous is precisely that there is a system or a kind of dynamic of recognition of the other religions. Very few religions present today themselves as only Catholicism has the solution, or only Islam, or only, so the extent to which religious transnational structures today are able to work with other religions is precisely the best antidote against this danger of any religion transforming its movement into a exclusivist, you could even say totalitarian movement. Having said that, of course, what makes, again, these movements unique is the extent to which many of their members, many of their people that are really, really involved in the movement are themselves not Catholic. That much of the dialogue, much of their encounter happens not with other Catholics, but with people outside.
Yeah.
And it is this dynamic that we need. We need a dynamic in which, if you wish, practice of democracy also are shared with beyond borders. We need, if we not create, I mean, the sociologists, if we do not create collective rituals that transcend borders, we will not have transnational solidarity. It's very clear. So the thing is, we need transnational movements of all kinds, feminists, pacifists, ecological, you name it. But we need to precisely, this practice have to be, to form habitus. Otherwise, it's not only that we are isolated selves, but we are also isolated groups. Our own totemic group is the only one that counts. So the question is, how do you go from totemic groups to other totemic groups that can, all these totemic groups can work together in some kind of solidarity? And this, of course, I think that it is happening. I see the evidence in interreligious dialogue. I see the evidence. But how effective this can be, we'll see.
You know, I'll observe, I'm going to make an observation and then turn to a question from the audience. I'll observe that I'm in Paris right now. And as a matter of fact, earlier today, I was meeting with my old friend and colleague, Daniel Dayan. And Daniel Dayan and Elihu Katz wrote a book entitled Media Events. But it really is about, which was a good title for it to get a very wide readership. But it really was about media rituals and ceremonial television. And what their analysis revealed is that the kinds of collective experiences, ritualistic experiences that Durkheim observed in his various studies actually were replicated in a certain type of television. And you know, arguing that this actually plays a very important role in supporting democracy in the televisual age, despite the first position, which was that television is destroying democratic life. So, I mean, it's very, very interesting. And my question is, are there, and with the, still thinking about Daniel, with the collapse of television, the ritualistic function that it played is not being played any longer. And that it's not, seems to me, to be a challenge to the arguments that you're making, either from Jose's point of view, moving from the ground down, like these insights permeating among the population, and from Patrick's point of view, how do these these local wisdoms kind of interact with each other? So maybe I could just note that is a standing problem unless you see some solutions. So when I ask the question about media, it's not only how do we avoid the dangers of media, but are there any media opportunities? Are there any opportunities that media provide for us to actually create the solidarities that your inquiries seek?
Let me just say before you move on, Jeff, this is literally what we are attempting here. And we will see what it produces, right? The outcomes are uncertain. That depends on our participation, our consistent development. But that's what the democracy seminar had been in different ways, and what it can be now in a digital age. The only thing I would say is that what we tend to see, the only difference, I think, that to what's not present in Daniel Dayan and Katz's analysis, is that we have completely fragmented our media environment, so that these media environments tend to support micro communities or meso communities that are sometimes wildly anti-democratic rather than something else like this. So we know this, but we have to recognize that there are certain kinds of media environments that are very deeply pro-democratic from within the ideals of particular religious communities. This is a classic argument of Jose's, is that there are particular religious communities that are not participating in democracy because somehow they've been infiltrated by the worm, the virus of modernity. They do it for their own reasons. They do it because this is where their own theology leads them. This is possible. And in fact, what I was seeing in these groups that were trying to promote a different media environment than the one that was being, some of their members were involved in.
Yeah. So all our discussion to this point is intriguing, but Michael Petro asks, he thinks that his question may be more addressed to you, Patty, than to Jose, but he asks, with respect to the micro level practices for subjectivity formation, how reliant are they on particular life worlds and normative backgrounds that their practitioners hold? Is there a way to promote this proliferation of these forms without encouraging a sort of evangelization style of encouragement? And I think, though the question is addressed directly to Patrick, Jose, this is an issue that Jose may want to comment on as well.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Michael, I believe. So this, I would say, yes, these forms that I'm studying are deeply, or if not completely, almost completely dependent upon, having a coherent vision of the world. Now, my own way of analyzing them was not to analyze ideal structures or worldviews or something. It was to look at what were the thick practices, the coherent practices that people engaged in over and over and over again, so that they could sustain a particular vision of the world. So it's like, what kind of thing makes the life world a life world? This, a semi-coherent set of practices. That would be my argument. So yes, it's completely dependent upon that. Now, two things about evangelization. By evangelization, if what we mean is some kind of, semi-secret effort to coerce others into believing what we believe or what these particular life worlds may hold, no, I do not think that has to be the case at all. But if what we mean by evangelization is that every single person is going to make evident the mode of subjectivity that is created in them by the particular kinds of practices that they engage in, like you cannot but be yourself in any particular thing, then the answer is, of course you are. But what that means then is there's a secular evangelization as well as a religious evangelization. And there are versions of Catholic evangelization that, much to my great lament, Steve Bannon represents one, and the community of Sant'Egidio represents another, rivalrous one. What we have to do is get over some of these masks that keep us from being articulate. They enforce inarticulously about the real tensions about democracy today. And instead, we have to look more closely at the kinds of things that can produce the kinds of transnational solidarities that Jose describes so well.
I will only add that from a Durkheimian perspective, one doesn't need to be so blindly a kind of a sociologist as Durkheim to believe that society somehow will create these bands of solidarity on its own. It's very clear that those things you cannot simply produce artificially. They come, but they come precisely from social encounters. And so it is precisely only in the encounter itself with others that we find this transcending force that leads us beyond ourselves. This is the fundamental argument, let's say, of Durkheim about the power of the social. And of course, for him, the social and the sacred are almost coterminous. And you could say, if this proliferation of forms leads to such a fragmentation that the life world itself disappears, then of course is the end of the social and the end of society. Then of course, yes, then we'll have nothing to do. But I think that there is still evidence that the social is still there as a creative force to address those issues. The problem today is that the social has to be at the right level to address the level of problems. So what we need to create now a transnational global social that addresses the global challenges. So and the question is how to do it. And it can only be done by building bridges, encountering others, and all these fragments have somehow to communicate, to encounter each other, and to build bridges among them. And how it is done? Well, we have to start one by one, movement by movement, etc.
So go ahead, Patty.
I very much agree with the ideal that Jose is describing here. I mean, I hope that's evident. The only thing I would say is that I think that when we move to a global solidarity, it's very difficult for a global solidarity to itself create thick enough practices to sustain people in the commitment. Now, we all know this, but just to raise that as a problem. And so the things that we are looking for are local communities or semi-local communities that have bonds with other local communities. And this is what Jose is describing. So the only thing I want to say is that global does not mean the old enlightened, in this sense, for me at least, I don't want to speak for Jose. Global in this sense does not mean the old Enlightenment version of cosmopolitanism. It means linked by local people who are willing to transcend their own local spaces.
But I have two responses to this. One is my tongue-in-cheek motto for the democracy seminar is Worldwide Committee of Democratic Correspondence, which I think is what you're describing. And as Patty noted before, it's a kind of very micro, marginal instantiation of this, but maybe has exemplary power. And then also, as Patty knows, I taught a course which he attended in the first time I taught it on social interaction, which was predicated on the idea that Tard won the Durkheim-Tard debate. No, you can't do that. You have to move. Ludo, you have to move. That's my grandson. I had to move from the privacy of his bedroom to the general room because the internet connection is better here. So
this is the real mode of social interaction right here, Jeff. We're doing it right now.
That's right. There you go. It seems to me, he has to go upstairs. This 11-year-old doesn't quite understand that. So the connectivity, this is behind my question about media. How do we connect? It's not only that we ought to connect, but actually the forms that enable these connections that are where we're global in the sense that we're connected with each other, but we are also true to ourselves and very and local, so the media question I think is actually a very serious one. To develop forms of interaction that enable the kinds of goods that you describe being realized.
But that's why I say that if the structures are already there, the networks are there, but they're not being used. The question is how to use them. Yeah, when Patrick mentions Jesuit University, there are 28 Jesuit universities in the US, and they don't practice this kind of networking. They've decided each of them becomes a different niche. So Loyola becomes expert on ecological justice. So they are focused. Other will be on gender relations. Georgetown will be on whatever, global affairs. Well, yes, but the point is that you have to create structures. My point is the structures are already there, but they are so localized or so nationalized that those orders that were transnational, I mean, who was more transnational than the Jesuits? They precisely got rid of them because the nation state could not trust them because they were so transnational. Now, however, they have become so nationalized, so local, that they have difficulties to go beyond themselves to build bridges, not only with each other within the nation, but so the question is, how do you move people to precisely even use the media we already have? I mean, the media of the fact that we can organize academic events so easily now with people over the world. This can be done exactly for everything else, right? Can be done for groups working on refugees and immigration, ecological. So the question is, the structures are already there, localized. The question is how to make them building bridges with other local structures so that you, for instance, a very simple thing, when the whole crisis of immigration refugees in Europe 4 or 5 years ago, the Pope had a very simple idea. Let each Catholic parish adopt an immigrant family. This kind of practice that makes a difference. If each Catholic parish, let's say, adopts a family, those people are not anymore these, basically rapists, but they're actually a human being, a human family that, with which we build bonds. And this is the way it's done. Parish by parish, locality by committee, etc.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say that I have some doubts that the structures are already there. I think that perhaps it would be better formulated that some of the structures are there that do this, that have experience in doing this and give it, but that new structures actually have to be formulated. Yes, Patrick. And then there's an anonymous attendee who has a very Tocquevillian question. So
good. I love the Tocquevillian question.
Yeah.
I agree with Jose as usual, but I would say that the structures, of course, must exist. We must have conduits for the relationships to take place. Like, yes, they must exist. But what I really think is happening is that there are, in fact, less people to move through the conduits than we might, like. And the question then becomes, like, to take the examples of Jesuit universities, right? We have this global network of universities. Now, I think that what's happening in terms of the rivalry that you depict, where everyone specializes, as Max Weber would say very clearly, right? Now, what's happening there is that these are for the future sustenance of the universities, which have to exist within a hyper-capitalistic system. Now, of course, there are pressures against that collaboration, but it doesn't mean it's not happening at all. It just means that those are limited and these specializations take place. But the places where it happens are, as everyone who works in an institution knows, where people who are generous enough to take up the opportunities for relationship that institutions make possible. And so there are people who are involved in these universities, staff members and students and faculty members, and even administrators who are able to link themselves up with others across there to do incredible projects, such as one on global education in refugee camps, like taught by faculty members at Jesuit universities in the United States. So the Jesuit Refugee Service around the world, it runs a number of refugee camps for migrants and internally displaced persons. Education within those camps is, of course, hugely problematic because the people who are there, even who want to be educators, are not themselves educated. So we've started teacher training programs. Some of these training programs taught by Jesuit university professors, lay people who, as Jose mentioned, may not themselves be Catholic, but are nevertheless motivated to take advantage of the Habermasian sluices that are present between these things. Enough from me. Sorry, Jeff.
I think actually one interesting amendment or addition to what you just said is that what is true of Catholic universities could be true of universities more generally.
Why not?
We're sort of seeing this potential percolating. For the more secular minded, for those who are more skeptical about religion or even anti-religious, the idea of the university is a universal idea,
Right.
and academics could take on as a professional responsibility to engage in these problems. And in fact, we saw it this in nascent forms appearing especially in this Zoom age. You know, our connections are becoming much more clear during this time of pandemic. So, you know, the Democracy Seminar has had 2 sessions on Afghanistan, including people who are still in Afghanistan, talking about ways of responding to, resisting, politically acting autonomously from the Taliban. With varying perspectives. Particularly, it has to do with, let's say, a connection between the Democracy Seminar and the American University of Afghanistan, which is actually a very fine institution. And we share, and attending that session were people from Ukraine, Poland, Brazil, Argentina, and it's not that we constituted the network that has this capacity to act together, but we saw signs that there is this network that could be acted upon. And you know, in an ideal sense, my dream about the Democracy Seminar is that we would robustly develop this. Yes, Catholic universities have this capacity, but so do secular
the
universities.
advantage they have that they are local everywhere also. It's not a university, because every Ivy League school tries to build Harvard in China, Harvard in India, right. Yale in India, etc. But then if you do that, you bring your own thing into the. Right. The question is, you have all these universities have become local. Jesuit local university in India, in Japan, and they are Japanese universities, they are Indian. So my point is, precisely because they've been first localized all over the globe, if now they come together and enter into a conversation, they build a kind of university which is actually multiversity, because our problem of the university is that Western universalism always tries to bring itself, its own particular universalism, as the true universal, and we know that every universal is particular. So the question is, how do you link multiversity in a way that it turns into the kind of acceptance of pluralversity? Because this is our problem today, accepting the reality of pluralism and to a certain extent rejecting our DNA of Western universalism coming both from Athens and Jerusalem together, that basically we are the center of the world. We can tell people how to think, we can. And so we need to actually open up to other forms of thinking, humanism, humanity. And so this is today in our post-Western global reality, we have to really enter into very serious encounters with other forms of humanism and of other forms of understanding the common good.
So you know, but I do want to now anonymous and another person wants to ask a question, so I have to give room for them. But I just want to say that, you know, in defense of what I just said, with universities more generally, and not just Catholic universities, is the principle of dialogue. You know, I think that what was unique about the New School's engagement with the larger world and the little thing, the Democracy Seminar's engagement, is that we learned, you know, Jose, you and I learned as much more from Adam Michnik than he learned from us. So that the encounter was, as I understand the ideal of the university is that we have to be ready in our pursuit of the truth, in pursuit of knowledge, to be open to the insights of people other than ourselves. So it's there. I'll agree with you that the connections in a particular network of universities associated with the Catholic Church, specifically associated with the Jesuits, it's more developed, but that greater development has advantages, I'll point out, but also disadvantages, because they're particular. You know, you're just agreeing, so I won't say any more about this. Now for the anonymous attendee, who I think is asking a Tocquevillian question, and he's considering both, or she is considering both sides of the discussion right now, the politics and the religion, and is asking and is noting that the legitimation or the esteem of both politics and religion is waning in the contemporary world, especially in the United States, and asks, couldn't it be that they're too connected? And how do you, there's Alexei speaking, who posits that religion was so strong in America because it was separated from official politics. How do you think that reflects on the issues that we're discussing today?
I mean, the question is very well put, because in the US, we know that the nones, those who the fastest growing number of believers are the unbelievers, namely the nones. And the nones are precisely known because they have enough of this evangelical engagement with American politics. So the question is not let's separate the two, but let's bring other type of religious politics, or the only way you are going to overcome this prejudice that religion is bad the moment it enters the public sphere is by precisely evidence that some religious people actually do contribute to a different kind of an open, pluralist, democratic public sphere. And there is no other solution. Again, is if you are convinced, and even if you are prejudiced, religion should not get involved in politics, then obviously I'm not going to convince you by arguments. Only if you see people committed to politics that you like and happen to do it out of religious commitment, then you realize maybe it's not religion itself, but the type of commitment, which kind of, if you wish, totem, to which kind of totem does my religious group belong? Is it tribal totemism or is it trans-tribal totemism?
I'm in full agreement with Jose. Yeah, I think his analysis is on the mark.
Yeah. And I think that what Jose spoke about earlier about religious pluralism is actually a key here.
Yeah,
that if it is the case, I'm not sure it is, but if it is the case that religious pluralism is ascendant, maybe at the heights it is, but I'm not sure that it's ascendant on the ground. But if it is ascendant, then that's a precondition for addressing the problem raised by the anonymous attendee. And that's an open question. And it's not only an open question it's not a theoretical question. It's not only an empirical question, but it's actually a normative, it's a question of normative commitment. That one, religious and non-religious people have to actually commit to this moral pluralism, religious pluralism, in order to take the first steps of addressing the problems that we face. I have to say that these days I'm feeling really pessimistic, because what we're talking about is extremely difficult, and I'm not sure we have the time. Both of you want to say something, and then there's another.
So please, Patrick, you go ahead.
Yeah, I would just say, like, within the Catholic case alone, right? The thing that I'm finding in these particular religious groups, it is not that they let go of their normative ideological commitments from within Catholicism. They in fact do not do that. What they let go of is the idea that those normative ideological commitments can be coercively imposed upon others. And
Yes.
that is a very important distinction point. So because what I think Habermas, Arendt, Dewey, everybody who theorizes the public sphere, like they want to have a space where actual rivals can engage with one another. And I think this is what we can actually see in these particular cases. Now, not all, I say again, but that these normative commitments that may disagree on difficult topics, gender, take or pick, right? All these different kinds of things, but can actually engage with one another precisely because they respect the fact that we are not going to try to induce some form of political integralism that will collapse the capacities for others to disagree in their own lifestyle enclaves. Like that balance of preserving personal ideals, normative ideals, while renouncing the enforcement mechanisms that liberal democracies make available for us, that gap is very difficult to maintain. But it is happening in some of these cases.
Right.
But the evidence from the world of Islam is clear. It is in those countries in which Muslim movements don't want the state to take over Islam, but they want to have pluralism within, are the ones where democracy functions. In Senegal, it is the Murid brothers, the brotherhoods that don't want a Sharia imposed by the state. They don't want any kind of Saudi Arabia kind of Islam imposed by the state. Bangladesh, again, pluralist Muslim. Indonesia, they're in trouble. There is a kind of fundamentalist Islam trying to take over also in these countries, but it is the internal pluralism within Indonesian Islam, Senegalese Islam, and Bangladeshi, which still makes these functioning democracies function.
So Joseph Simmons, of a Jesuit, I believe,
Yes.
has a question. Do you both know? Do you know who this is?
Well, he comes from Campion Hall. We know Campion Hall very well. They are doing a great work there. Yes.
Okay. So he thanks you for, I say thanks us for a fascinating conversation. Our discussion leads him to think that each of us maintains something like dual citizenship, a religious identity and a national ethnic affiliation. The danger becomes when they are conflated or when one supplants the other. Only the city of God matters versus only the city of the world matters, to borrow Augustine's language. Thoughts, he asks?
Well, obviously, Augustine himself gave the solution in the city of God. This is what seculum means. Seculum is this temporal space, the here and now, between now and the second coming of Christ, the parousia, in which, as Augustine says, Christians and pagans have to work together for the civil common good of the city of men. So precisely, it is Augustine that this is what seculum originally means. Before Augustine, seculum only meant an aeon, a period of time. Now doesn't mean this. It is this living in the world between now and the end of times and having to work together with those who do not believe like we do. Pagans and Christians coming together for the good of the city of Rome, the city of men.
I would just want to differentiate one thing with regard to this. Maybe Joseph was agreeing already with what I will say, but that if we are talking about a dual citizenship within persons, a divided sense of self within persons, in fact, no, this is not what I am seeing, at least. This is an integrated sense of self, but it's an integrated sense of self that renounces public control. So that means then if we are talking about a differentiated public sphere, if the citizenship exists in public, then yes, of course we want to talk about those divided things. So an agreement that there are two cities, but that the person who inhabits both cities is the same person in these instances. Now, there are other ways to inhabit those two things. I do not denigrate those or say that this one is only innocent, but.
And ultimately, of course, the problem of let's say, secularism as a doctrine has been the notion that precisely individuals, mother individuals, ought to have autonomy, and autonomy then demands that we get rid of God because this will mean heteronomy. Well, in practice, we know that this is not the case, that a lot of people who are basically somehow have a connection with transcendence can be very autonomous and work for beyond themselves for the common good, while maintaining their autonomy. So it is a problem to think that somehow if somebody is linked to transcendence, therefore cannot be autonomous, because I think that this is the fundamental issue, how to build autonomous selves that are able to transcend themselves. And here is where transcendence helps the selves transcend themselves and enter in communication with others.
Yes, and the transcendence need not be political. Excuse me, religious.
No, no, the
I
sacred
mean,
for Durkheim is the social, right?
Right. Anything that we've left unsaid?
This has been lovely, and I'm really grateful to have learned something more from Jose. And Jeff, you continue to push and provoke in the best kinds of ways. I'm very grateful.
Jose?
It's a pleasure to communicate with you, and with I mean, the digital during the pandemic has helped us to do these kind of things. We have to do it, but of course it was a very, very tough thing for religious communities, because what this kind of habitus of gathering congregation, it is the congregation every week that gives the force to transcend themselves for the whole week, right? And to go beyond themselves. And without these rituals, it was very difficult for many people. So the question is, how do we create these collective rituals through media that is able to transcend nations and continents and religions, obviously.
Right.
It has to transcend. It has to transcend one's own religion, one's own country, one's own culture.
I realize that my last sentence suggested that we're wrapping up, but I think I want to kind of raise one more issue, and this is in appreciation of the religious and a challenge to the more secular minded, such as myself, I think that, and Patty referred to this a bit when he called for, a thick commitment. And religion does provide a thick commitment, but the question is whether it's going to be so thick that it doesn't allow for anyone else. And both of you are pointing to developments, religious developments that suggest a cautionary move in that regard. I have always found the kind of beauty of pluralism and my absolute enchantment with other people and other insights as being a motivation that is quite thick for me. But I know that the challenge is that this is not my sensibility, which I'm sure I share with the two of you and with Lala too, and maybe all the members of the Democracy Seminar, is very, very profound. It doesn't seem to motivate less educated people, more localized people, less urban people than ourselves. The urban experience, the experience of higher education kind of opens this up to us. Alas, not everyone is open to this. So, the project of getting the commitment to the sorts of changes, to kind of work on the solidarities that are necessary for addressing the problems of our time amongst the non-religious, I think, is actually one of the major challenges of our time.
Yeah, because the bunch of solidarity, we know solidarity in Poland has three sources: the Catholic one, Catholic solidarity, the socialist one, working class solidarity, and the national one, national solidarity. They happen to come together happily for the good cause. Then they broke apart. The three broke apart later. So the question is how to bring together, bridge bunch of different solidarities so that they can work together in the same direction. And here I would say each religion has its own, we could call it charisma, right?
Right.
The charisma of Judaism has been refused in Christian universalism. No, to be unique and different. We are not Christians, we are Jews. For 20 centuries, it is the great contribution of Judaism to otherwise this juggernaut of Christian universalism that basically will take over everything.
Yeah,
right?
for which we suffered. We suffered some for that.
Of course, but now, of course, you suffer. But this is now we have to recognize that this is the great contribution of Judaism to our contemporary globalization. Refuse to be assimilated and precisely maintain its own identity, and yet being open in conversation with others, in communion with others in its own way. And other religions, the most primitive religions today, let's say Afro, Voodoos, Afro-Brazilians, and indigenous religions have the charisma of being able to resacralize nature again. We need a commitment, which is almost the need to resacralize nature. As long as we don't get to understand nature as another soul with which we are in contact, it's only an object. We have to bring animism into nature again, because only then we'll see as part of a larger soul. So again, each religion will have different charismas. I know with the charisma of Catholicism is, I don't want to mention it here. But so again, Buddhism has its own charisma, and all of them together can help us to, at least address some of these issues.
Jeff, you have known this for many years, but although Jose may not be a practicing Catholic, as evidenced by his last statement, he is a very actively practicing Weberian, and it's lovely to hear. It's fantastic.
Yeah. Well, this was great. And thank you very much. The only thing that I regret about this form of interaction, I mean, it's wonderful because we're together and we're having this conversation, though we're in 3 very different places, and our audience is from even more different places, is that we can't go out for a coffee or a drink or a meal now and have a chat to reconsider what we've said and kind of explore more fully. But I hope in the near future.
So you repeat ritually next year in Jerusalem, and you repeat it ritually, and
there
that's
you
it.
go.
And we hope the next year will be in Jerusalem.
Well,
we can drink together.
I'm even going to up the ante. I'd like to say next year in New York, because we're hoping to have a democracy seminar event at the end of April, where some people will be able to meet each other, and it will necessarily be a hybrid event, so that some of us will be able to meet each other and some not. So
amen.
Amen. And with that, good night. It's a wrap. It's been wonderful. Thanks a lot. Thank you, Lala, for helping us do this. And thank you for those of you who've continued to listen to us for your attention. And if you have any comments that you want to make as a result of our conversation, if you'd like to contribute to the democracy seminar, we're welcome to do communicate with us, and we could further explore this fascinating topic. Take care.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thank you very much, all.